Okay, that makes it much, much bigger. It'd be a fair bit easier to read, I think. Da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Da-da-da, da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da. Da-da-da-da-da. Da-da. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Da-da. Do the trick. Da-da-da, da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da. Da-da-dum, dum, dum, ba-da-ba-dum, bam, bam. Look out, old Frankie is back. Bless you, I guess. Let's keep you. So we're on to part 2. Do we remember what's happening on part 2? Oh. And I want to do this. There we go. Now I can lean this way, and now my face is right here. Cool. But then when I start leaning over here, now I'm gone. Oh no. Terrible, terrible dichotomy. What a shame. That's a big word. Well, I've been reading book. There's only one book. It's this book. I've been reading book. Read it, book. Read it, book. Now, where was we anyway? What had happened? Oh, yeah, he's looking at the coin, isn't he? Okay. Well, if he's looking at the coin... Ba-da-ba-bum, ba-da-ba-dum-ba-bum. Do-do-ba-do-ba-da-ba. One music thing. That's it, just one. Come on, you offer me music all the time. Where's the music stuff? Hang on a minute. Don't get you. It's not happening. Can't find out. No music, no nothing. Never mind. Never mind. Oh, the hidden. I've got to play the hidden at some point. It's getting near Halloween. I have to get good at it again. God, I was good at that game. People fucking hated me on that game. Oh, God. It's him again. What we're gonna do? Dunno. What are you gonna do? What are you going to do? So the plan now. I am obviously just passing time. I am obviously just passing time, but the plan now is to read part 2. Page 134. Page 133. Read along if you'd like, children. Read along if you like. Remember, this was written, or published at least, in 1949. A long time ago. Chapter 1. It was the middle of the morning, and Winston had left the cubicle to go to the lavatory. Now that I've got your attention, just give me a minute. A solitary figure was coming towards him from the other end of the long, brightly lit corridor. It was the girl with the dark hair. 4 days had gone past since the evening when he had run into her outside that junk shop. As she came nearer, he saw that her right arm was in a sling. Not noticeable at a distance because it was of the same colour as her overalls. Probably she had crushed her hand while swinging around on one of the big kaleidoscopes on which the plots of novels were roughed in. It was a common accident in the fiction department. Okay, so I'm guessing. Fiction department. Wow, 10 minutes I've been here already. I really did say an hour, didn't I? They were perhaps 4 meters apart where the girl stumbled and fell almost flat on her face. That's what a spy would do to make you like them. Okay, let's keep reading. A sharp cry of pain was wrung out of her. She must have fallen right on the injured arm. Winston stopped short. The girl had risen to her knees. Her face had turned to a milky yellow colour, against which her mouth stood out redder than ever. Her eyes were fixed on his, with an appealing expression that looked more like fear than pain. A curious emotion stirred in Winston's heart. In front of him was an enemy who was trying to kill him. In front of him also is a human creature in pain and perhaps with a broken bone. Already he had instinctively started forward to help her. In the moment when he had seen her fall on the bandaged arm, it had been as though he felt the pain in his own body. "You're hurt," he said. "It's nothing. Me arm. It'll be all right in a second." She spoke in a rough voice. I'm kidding. Yeah, it's nothing. My arm is. It'll be all right in a second. Yeah. There you go. See, that's what she sounds like. That's why I don't like her. She spoke as though she was from somewhere else. Her heart was fluttering. She had certainly turned very pale. "You haven't broken anything." "Ah, I'm all right, she says. It hurt for a moment, that's all. She held out her free hand to him and helped her up, and he helped her up. She had regained some of her colour and appeared very much better. It's nothing, she repeated shortly. I only gave my wrist a bit of a bang. Thanks, comrade. And with that, she walked on in the direction in which she had been going, as briskly as though it had really been nothing. She likes him. She likes him. Quite a bit. I think she's a love interest. The whole incident could not have taken as much as half a minute. Not to let anyone's feelings appear in one's face was a habit that had acquired the status of an instinct. And in any case, they had been standing straight in front of the telescreen when the thing happened. Nevertheless, it had been very difficult not to betray a momentary surprise. For in the 2 or 3 seconds while he was helping her up, the girl had slipped something into his hand. There was no question that she had done it intentionally. It was something small and flat. Told you it was deliberate. I told you it was deliberate. I'm starting to already get the sensation now that she is interested in him, but she might be a spy. I'm sticking with my instinct saying she's a spy, but stories like this probably make her the seeming accomplice of the bad guy when in fact she's not. As he passed through the lavatory door, he transferred it to his pocket and felt it with the tips of his fingers. It was a scrap of paper folded into a square. While he stood at the urinal, he managed, with a little more fingering, oh, come on, dude, pick your words carefully, to get it unfolded. Again, she's not in the room, she's already gone. Obviously, there must be a message of some kind written on it. For a moment, he was tempted to take it out into one of the water closets and read it at once, but that would be shocking folly, as he well knew. There was no place where you could be more certain that the telescreens were watched continuously. He went back to his cubicle, sat down, threw the fragment of paper casually among the other papers on his desk, put on his spectacles, and hitched the speak right towards him. 5 minutes, he told himself. 5 minutes at the very least. His heart bumped in his breast with frightening loudness. Fortunately, the piece of work he was engaged on was mere routine, the rectification of a long list of figures, not needing close attention. That's pretty decent. I'll take that for sure. There we go. Finally pinned it. Lovely. Sweet. Whatever was written on the paper, it must have some kind of political meaning. So far as he could see, there were two possibilities. One, much more likely, was that the girl was an agent of the thought police, just as he had feared. He did not know why the thought police should choose to deliver their message in such a fashion, but perhaps they had their reasons. The thing was written on the paper might be a threat, a summons, an order to commit suicide. A trap of some description. But there was another, wilder possibility that kept raising its head, though he tried vainly to suppress it. This was that the message did not come from the thought police at all, but from some kind of underground organisation. Perhaps the Brotherhood existed after all. Perhaps the girl was part of it. No doubt the idea was absurd, but it had sprung into his mind in the very instant of feeling the scrap of paper in his hand. It was not till a couple of minutes later that the other, more probable explanation had occurred to him, and even now, though his intellect told him that the message probably meant death, still, that was not what he believed, and the unreasonable hope persisted, and his heart banged, and it was with difficulty that he kept his voice from trembling, and he murmured his figures into the speak right. He rolled up the completed bundle of work and slid it into the pneumatic tube. 8 minutes had gone by. He had readjusted his spectacles on his nose, sighted, and drew the next batch of work towards him with the scrap of paper upon it. Or on top of it. He flattened it out. On it was written in large, unformed handwriting, "I love you." Now that's cool. Told you, love interest. I could see that immediately. As soon as she slipped it in his hand in front of that fucking screen too. Stupid cow. For several seconds he was too stunned to even throw the incriminating thing into the memory hole. When he did so, although he knew very well the danger of showing too much interest, he could not resist reading it once again, and to make sure that the words were really there. For the rest of the morning it was very difficult. He doesn't like her. He doesn't like her at all. I mean, she's shapely, but he doesn't like her. He's got this like icky feeling about her. For the rest of the morning, it was very difficult to work. What was even worse than having to focus his mind on a series of niggling jobs was the need to conceal his agitation from the telescreen. He felt as though a fire were burning in his belly. Lunch in the hot, crowded, noise-filled canteen was torment. He had hoped to be alone for a little while during the lunch hour, but as bad luck would have it, the imbecile Parsons flopped down beside him, the tang of his sweat almost defeating the tinny smell of stew, and kept up a stream of talk about preparations for Hate Week. Oof. Hate Week. Ouch. Yes. He was particularly enthusiastic about a papier-mâché model of Big Brother's head, 2 meters wide, which was being made for the occasion by his daughter's troop of spies. The irritating thing was that in the racket of voices, Winston could hardly hear what Parsons was saying, and was constantly having to ask for some fatuous remark to be repeated. Just once he caught a glimpse of the girl at a table with 2 other girls at a far end of the room. She appeared to not have seen him, and he did not look in that direction again. The afternoon was more bearable. Immediately after lunch there arrived a delicate, difficult piece of work which would take several hours and necessitated putting everything else aside. It consisted in falsifying a series of production reports of 2 years ago in such a way as to cast discredit on a prominent member of the inner party, who was now under a cloud. This is the kind of thing that Winston was good at, and for more than 2 hours he succeeded in shutting the girl out of his mind altogether. Then the memory of her face came back, and with it rage and intolerable desire to be alone. With it a raging, intolerable desire to be alone. Until he could be alone, it was impossible to think this new development out. Tonight was one of his nights at the community centre. He wolfed another tasteless meal in the canteen, hurried off to the centre, took part in the solemn foolery of the discussion group, played 2 games of table tennis, swallowed several glasses of gin, and sat for half an hour through a lecture entitled "Ingsoc in Relation to Chess." His soul writhed with boredom, but for once he had no impulse to shirk his evening out at the centre. At the sight of the words, "I love you," the desire to stay alive had welled up in him, and the taking of minor risks suddenly seemed stupid. It was not till 23 hours when he was home and in bed, in the darkness, where you were safe even from the telescreen so long as you kept silent, that he was able to think continuously. It was a physical problem that had to be solved. How to get in touch with a girl and arrange a meeting. He did not consider any longer the possibility that she might be laying some kind of trap for him. He knew that it was not so, because of her unmistakable agitation when she handed the note. Obviously, she had been frightened out of her wits, as well as she might. Nor did the idea of refusing her advances even cross his mind. Only 5 nights ago he had contemplated smashing her skull in with a cobblestone. But that was of no importance. You know, before we met, I really wanted to fucking kill you. But you're a good person, I like you. God damn it, mate, stop letting your dick speak for you. Use this, for fuck's sake. You were so close at being safe, what are you doing? He thought of her naked, youthful body as he had seen it in his dream. He had imagined her a fool like all the rest of them, her head stuffed with lies and hatred, her belly full of ice. A kind of fever seized him at the thought that he might lose her. The white, youthful body might slip away from him. What he feared more than anything else was that she would simply change her mind if he did not get in touch with her quickly. But Ooh. The physical difficulty of meeting was enormous. It was like trying to make a move at chess when you were already mated. Whichever way you turned, the telescreen faced you. Actually, all the possible ways of communicating with her had occurred to him within 5 minutes of reading the note, but now, with time to think, he went over them one by one, as though laying out a row of instruments on a table. Obviously, the kind of encounter that had happened this morning could not be repeated. If she had worked in the records department, it might have been comparatively simple. But he had only a very dim idea of whereabouts in the building the fiction department lay, and he had no pretext for going there. If he had known where she lived, at what time she left work, he could have contrived to meet her somewhere on her way home, but try to follow her home was not safe, because it could mean loitering about outside the ministry. Yeah, can't be loitering there. Which was bound to be noticed. As for sending a letter through the mails, it was out of the question. By a routine, it was not even secret. That was not even secret. All letters were opened in transit. Actually, few people ever wrote letters. For the messages that it was occasionally necessary to send, there were printed postcards with long lists of phrases, and you struck out the ones that were inapplicable. In any case, he did not know the girl's name, let alone her address. Finally, he decided that the safest place was the canteen. If he could get her at a table by herself, somewhere in the middle of the room, not too near the telescreens, and with a sufficient buzz of conversation around. If these conditions endured for, say, 30 seconds, it might be possible for an exchange of a few words. Fucking hell, you gotta think like that just to talk to someone. Ouch. For a week after this, life was like a restless dream. On the next day, she did not appear in the canteen until he was leaving it. The whistle had already blown. Presumably, she had been changed onto a later shift. They passed each other without a glance. On the day after that, she was in the canteen at the usual time, but with 3 other girls and immediately under a telescreen. Then, for 3 dreadful days, she did not appear at all. Aww. Poor dude. His whole mind and body seemed to be afflicted with an unbearable sensitivity, a sort of transparency which made every movement and every sound of contact, every word he had to speak or listen to, an agony. Even in sleep he could not altogether escape from her image. He did not touch the diary during those days. If there was any relief, it was in his work, in which he could sometimes forget himself for 10 minutes at a stretch. He had absolutely no clue as to what had happened to her. There was no inquiry he could make. She might have been vaporized. She might have committed suicide. She might have been transferred to the other end of Oceania. Worst and likeliest of all, she might simply have changed her mind and decided to avoid him. The next day she reappeared. Her arm was out of the sling, and she had a band of sticker and plaster round her wrist. The relief of seeing her was so great that he could not resist staring directly at her for several seconds. On the following day, he very nearly succeeded in speaking to her. When he came into the canteen, she was sitting at a table well out from the wall, and was quite alone. It was early, and the place was not very full. The queue edged forward till Winston, almost at the counter, then was held up for 2 minutes because someone in front was complaining that he had not received his tablet of saccharin. But the girl was still alone. When Winston secured his tray and began to make for her table, he walked casually towards her, his eyes searching for a place at some table beyond her. She was perhaps 3 meters away from him. Another 2 seconds would do it. Then a voice behind him called, "Smith!" He pretended not to hear. "Smith!" repeated the voice, more loudly. It was no use. He turned round. A blonde-headed, silly-faced young man named Wilshire, whom he barely knew, was inviting him with a smile to a vacant place on his table. It was not safe to refuse. After having been recognised and could not go sit at a table with an unattended girl, it was too noticeable. He sat down with a friendly smile. The silly blonde face beamed into his. Winston had a hallucination of himself smashing a pickaxe right into the middle of it. The girl's table filled up a few minutes later, but she must have seen him coming toward her, and perhaps she would take a hint. Next day, he took care to arrive early. Surely enough, she was at a table in about the same place, and again alone. The person immediately ahead of him in the queue was a small, swiftly moving, beetle-like man with a flat face and tiny, suspicious eyes. As Winston turned away from the counter with his tray, he saw that the little man was making straight for the girl's table. His hopes sank again. There was a vacant place at a table further away. That he would be sufficiently attentive to his own comfort to choose the emptiest table. Huh? But something in the little man's appearance suggested that he would be sufficiently attentive to his comfort to choose the emptiest table. With ice at his heart, Winston followed. It was no use unless he could get the girl alone. At this moment, there was a tremendous crash. The little man was sprawling on all fours, his tray had gone flying. 2 streams of soup and coffee were flowing across the floor. He started to his feet with a malignant glance at Winston, whom evidently suspected of having tripped him up. But it was all right. 5 seconds later, with a thundering heart, Winston was sitting at the girl's table. He did not look at her. He unpacked his tray and promptly began eating. It was all important to speak at once before anything else came, but now a terrible fear had taken possession of him. A week had gone by since she had first approached him. She would have changed her mind. She must have changed her mind. It was impossible that this affair should end successfully. Such things did not happen in real life. He might have flinched altogether from speaking if at this moment he had not seen Ampleforth, the hairy-eared poet, wandering limply around the room with a tray, looking for a place to sit down in his vague way. Ampleforth was attached to Winston, and would certainly sit down at his table if he caught sight of him. There was perhaps a minute in which to act. Both Winston and the girl were eating steadily. The stuff they were eating was a thin stew, actually a soup, a haricot of haricot beans. In a low murmur, Winston began speaking. Neither of them looked up. Steadily, they spooned the watery stuff into their mouths and between spoonfuls exchanged a few necessary words in low, expressionless voices. What time do you leave work? 18:30. Where come with me? Victory Square, near the monument. It's full of telly screens. Doesn't matter if there's a crowd. Any signal? Nah. Don't come up to me until you see me among a lot of people. And don't look at me. Just keep somewhere near me. What time? 19 hours. Alright. Ampleforth failed to see Winston and sat down at another table. They did not speak again, and so far it was possible for 2 sitting on opposite sides of the same table, they did not look at one another. The girl finished her lunch quickly and made off, while Winston stayed to smoke a cigarette. Winston was in Victory Square before the appointed time, of course. He wandered around the base of the enormous flooded column, at the top of which Big Brother's statue gazed southwards towards the skies where he had vanquished the Eurasian aeroplanes. The East Asian aeroplanes, it had been a few years ago, in the Battle of Airstrip 1. Airstrip 1 is the name of England, by the way, just so we're all caught up there. In the street in front of it, there was a statue of a man on horseback, which was supposed to represent Oliver Cromwell. Really? Okay. At 5 minutes past the hour, the girl still had not appeared. Again, the terrible fear seized upon Winston. She was not coming. She had changed her mind. He walked slowly up the north side of the square and got a sort of pale-coloured pleasure from identifying St. Martin's Church, whose bells, when it had bells, had charmed, "You owe me 3 farthings." Then he saw the girl standing at the base of the monument, reading, or pretending to read, a poster which ran spirally up the column. It was not safe to go near her until some more people had accumulated. There were telescreens all around the pediment, but at this moment there was a din of shouting and a zoom of heavy vehicles from somewhere to the left. Suddenly, everyone seemed to be running across the square. The girl nipped nimbly around the lions at the base of the monument and joined in the rush. Winston followed. As he ran, he gathered from some shouted remarks that a convoy of Eurasian prisoners was passing. Already, a dense mass of people was blocking the south side of the square. Winston, at normal times, the kind of person who gravitates to the outer edge of any kind of scrimmage, shoved, butted, squirmed his way forward into the heart of the crowd. Soon he was within arm's length of the girl, but the way was blocked by an enormous prawl and an almost equally enormous woman, presumably his wife, but seemed to form an impenetrable wall of flesh. Winston wriggled himself sideways and with a violent lunge managed to drive his shoulder between them. For a moment it felt as though his entrails were being ground to a pulp between the 2 muscular hips. Then he had broken through, sweating a little. He was next to the cat. Hi! You can imagine that moment, can't you? They were shoulder to shoulder, staring fixedly in front of them. A long line of trucks with wooden face guards armed with submachine guns, standing upright in each corner, was passing slowly down the street. In the trucks, yet little yellow men in shabby greenish uniforms were squatting, jammed close together. Their sad Mongolian faces gazed out over the sides of the trucks, utterly incurious. Oh, yellow faces, I get it now. Oh, that is a very intimidating thing. Oh. Occasionally, when a truck jolted, there was a clank clank of metal. All the prisoners were wearing leg irons. Truckload after truckload of the sad faces passed. Winston knew they were there, but he saw them only intermittently. The girl's shoulder and her arm right down to the elbow were pressed against his. Her cheek almost near enough for him to feel its warmth. She had immediately taken charge of the situation, just as she had done in the canteen. She began speaking in the same expressionless voice as before, with lips barely moving, a mere murmur, easily drowned out by the dinner voices and rumbling of the trucks. Can you hear me? Yes. Can you get Sunday afternoon off? Yes. Then listen carefully. You'll have to remember this. Go to Paddington Station. And with like a sort of military precision that astonished him, she outlined the route that he was to follow. A half-hour railway journey. Turn left outside the station, 2 kilometres along the road, a gate with a top bar missing, a path across a field, a grass-grown lane, a track between bushes, a dead tree with moss on it. It was as though she had a map inside of her head. Can you remember all that? She remembered. She murmured finally. Yes. Whoops, wrong button. You turn left, then right, then left again, and the gate's got no top bar. Yes, what time? About 15. You may have to wait. I'll get there by another way. Are you sure you remember everything? Yes. Then get away from me as quick as you can. She need not have told him that, but for the moment they could not extricate themselves from the crowd. The trucks were still filing past, the people still insatiably gaping at the start. At the start there had been a few boos and hisses, but it came only from the party members among the crowd, and soon had stopped. The prevailing emotion was simply curiosity. Foreigners, whether from Eurasia or East Asia, were a kind of strange animal. One literally never saw them except in the guise of prisoners, and even as prisoners one never got more than a momentary glimpse of them. Nor did one know what became of them, apart from the few who were hanged as war criminals. The others simply vanished, presumably into forced labour camps. The round Mongol faces had given way to faces of more European type. Dirty, bearded and exhausted, from over scrubby cheekbones, eyes looked into Winston's, sometimes with a strange intensity, and flashed away again. The convoy was drawing to an end, and in the last truck he could see an aged man. His face, a mass of grizzled hair, standing upright with wrists crossed in front of him, as though he were used to having them bound together. It was almost time for Winston and the girl to part, but at that last moment, while the crowd still hemmed them in, her hand felt his and gave it a fleeting squeeze. It could not have been 10 seconds, and yet it seemed a long time, and their hands were clasped together. He had time to learn every detail of her hand. He explored the long fingers, the shapely nails, the work-hardened palm, with its row of calluses, the smooth flesh under the wrists. Merely from feeling it, he would have known it by sight. In the same instant it occurred to him that he did not know what colour the girl's eyes were. They were probably brown, but people with dark hair sometimes had blue eyes. To turn his head and look at her would have been inconceivable folly. With hands locked together, invisible among the press of bodies, they stared steadily in front of them, and gazed of the eyes, and instead of the eyes of the girl, the eyes of the aged prisoner gazed mournfully at Winston, out of the nests of hair. Oh. That's a bit sad. Chapter 2. Winston picked his way up the lane through dappled light and shade, stepping out into pools of gold wherever the boughs parted. Under the streets to the left of him, the ground was misty with bluebells. The air seemed to kiss one's skin. It was the 2nd of May. From somewhere deeper in the heart of the wood came the droning of ringed doves. He was a bit early. Oh, okay, so this is next day stuff. Got you. Oh. There had been no difficulties about the journey, and the girl was so evidently experienced that he was less frightened than he would normally have been. Presumably, she could be trusted to find a safe place. In general, you could not assume that you were much safer in this country than in London. There were no telescreens, of course, but there was always the danger of concealed microphones by which your voice might be picked up and recognised. Besides, it was not easy to make a journey by yourself without attracting attention. For distances of less than 100 kilometres, it was not necessary to get your passport endorsed, but sometimes there were patrols hanging about the railway stations who examined the papers of any party member they found there and were asked awkward questions. However, no patrols had appeared, and on the walk from the station he had made sure by cautious backward glances that he was not being followed. The train was full of proles, in holiday mood because of the summery weather. Alright, we'll go with that. The wooden seated carriage in which he travelled was filled to overflowing by a single enormous family, ranging from a toothless great-grandmother to a month-old baby, going out to spend an afternoon with in-laws in the country, and, as they freely explained to Winston, to get hold of a little black market butter. Cannabis butter, that's what that's got to be. It can't just be normal butter. Oh, wait, no, that's going to be a thing soon. We've got artificial butter now. Did you know that? Artificial butter. So, yeah, we're going to get black market butter's coming. It's coming. The lane widened, and in a minute he came to the footpath that she had told him of. A mere cattle track which plunged between the bushes. He had no watch, but it could not be 15 yet. The bluebells were so thick underfoot that it was impossible not to tread on them. He knelt down and began picking some partly to pass the time away, but also also from a vague idea that I would like to have a bunch of flowers to offer the girl when they met. Oh, this guy. Oh, bless. That wife of his must have been terrible. Catherine was her name. Oh, welcome back, Martin. You haven't missed much. We've just gotten into chapter 2, so we're not far. You better. Oh, we've just been through a nice scene where they meet each other in a crowd and they're holding hands, and it gets all mushy. And he meets the girl, and she's giving him a series of directions to go, and he's meeting her in this place, and he's just trampled a bunch of flowers, and he's like, "Oh, let's pick a load of flowers. I want to give her a load of flowers," and that's where we are. In the middle of the screen, so a bunch of flowers. Offer the girl when they met. I am here. He had got together a big bunch and was smelling their faint, sickly scent when a sound at his back froze him, the unmistakable crackle of a foot on twigs. He went on picking bluebells. It was the best thing to do. It might be the girl, or he might have been followed after all. To look round was to show guilt. He picked another and another, and a hand fell lightly on his shoulder. He looked up. It was the girl. She shook her head, evidently as a warning that he must keep silent, then parted the bushes and quickly led the way along the narrow track into the wood. Obviously she had been that way before, for she dodged the boggy bits as though by habit. Winston followed, still clasping his bunch of flowers. His first feeling was relief, but as he watched the strong, slender body moving in front of him, with a scarlet sash that was just tight enough to bring out the curve of their hips. The one that says anti-sex, by the way. This says anti-sex party. And she's wearing it. It's just wrapped tightly around her. Oh, you tease. You fucking tease. The sense of his own inferiority was heavy upon him. Ooh, oh, she's dominating. She's dominating. Even now, it seemed quite likely that when she turned around and looked at him, she would draw back after all. The sweetness of the air and the greatness of the leaf daunted him. Already in the walk from the station, the May sunshine had made him feel dirty and etiolated. I think I learned a word today. A creature of the indoors, with a sooty dust of London on the pores of his skin. In the pores of his skin. It occurred to him that till now she had probably never seen him in broad daylight, in the open. They came to the fallen tree that she had spoken of. The girl hopped over and forced apart the bushes. I bet she did. In which there did not seem to be an opening. Uh-oh. She's a dude. She's a dude. I'm kidding. When Winston followed her, he found that they were in a natural clearing, a tiny grassy knoll surrounded by tall saplings that shut it in completely. The girl stopped and turned. "Here we are," she said. Oh, sorry. "Here we are." I gave her a man's voice earlier on. I'm sorry, it's a man's voice now. He was facing her at several paces distance. As yet he did not dare move nearer her. "I didn't want to say anything in the lane," she went on, "in case there's a mic hidden there. I didn't suppose there is, but there could be. There's always a chance of one of those swine recognizing your voice. We're all right here." That should be one word. A-L-R-I-G-H-T. He still had not the courage to approach her. "We're all right here," he repeated stupidly. "Yes, look at the trees." There were small ashes, which were some have been cut down and had sprouted up again into a forest of poles, none of them thicker than one's wrist. "There's nothing big enough to hide a mic in." There's nothing big enough to hide a mic in. Besides, I've been here before. I bet you. I'll change the voice, I'm sorry. They were only making conversation. He had managed to move closer to her now. She stood before him very upright, with a smile on her face that looked faintly ironical, as though she were wondering why he was so slow to act. She's basically stood there being like, "Well?" And he's like, "Flowers!" The bluebells had cascaded onto the ground. They seemed to have fallen of their own accord. He took her hand. "Would you believe," he said, "that till this moment I didn't know what colour your eyes were?" And they were brown, he noted. A rather light shade of brown with dark lashes. "And now that you've seen what I'm really like, can you still bear to look at me?" "Yes, easily. I'm 39 years old. I've got a wife that I can't get rid of. I've got varicose veins. I've got 5 false teeth. I couldn't care less," said the girl. The next moment, it was hard to say by whose act she was in his arms. At the beginning, he had no feeling except sheer incredulity. The youthful body was strained against his own. The mass of dark hair was against his face, and yes, actually, she had turned her face up, and he was kissing the wide red mouth. Fucking hell. A wide red mouth. Okay, whatever. She had clasped her arms about his neck. She was calling him darling, precious one, loved one. He had pulled her down to the ground. She was utterly unresisting. He could do what he liked with her, but the truth was that he had no physical sensation, except that of mere contact. All he felt was incredulity and pride. He was glad that this was happening, but had no physical desire. It was too soon. Her youth and prettiness had frightened him. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. He was too much used to living without women. Oh shit, wrong button. And he did not know the reason. The girl picked herself up and pulled a bluebell out of her hair. She sat against him, putting her arm around his waist. "Never mind, dear. There's no hurry. We've got the whole afternoon. Isn't this a splendid hideout? I found it when I got lost once on a community hike. If anyone was coming, you could hear him 100 meters away." "What is your name?" said Winston. "Good morning, Julia. It's me, Joe. Just wanted to let you know. Getting to look at you." Julia, I know yours. It's Winston. Winston Smith. How did you find that out? I expect I'm better at finding things out than you are. Dear, tell me, what did you think of me before that day I gave you the notes? Ah! Don't tell her! Don't tell her! No! He did not feel any temptation to tell lies. What are you doing? What are you doing? You're going to dry that pussy up? What are you doing? No, 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 no. It was even a sort of love offering to start off by telling the worst. No. No. I hated the sight of you, he said. I wanted to rape you and then murder you afterwards. 2 weeks ago, I thought seriously of smashing your head in with a cobblestone. If you really want to know, I imagine that you had something to do with the thought police. And the girl laughed delightedly, evidently taking this as a tribute to the excellence of her disguise. Not the thought police, you don't honestly think that. Well, perhaps not exactly that, but from your general appearance, merely because you're young and fresh and healthy, you understand, I thought that probably... You thought that I was a good party member. Pure in word and deed. Banners, processions, slogans, games, community hikes, all that. And you thought that if I had a quarter of a chance, I'd denounce you as a thought criminal and get you killed off. Yeah? Something of that kind. A great many young girls are like that, you know. It's this bloody thing that does it, she said. Ripping off the sash, showing off. Ripping off the scarlet sash of the Junior Anti-Sex League and flinging it onto a bough. Boch. Then, as though touching her waist had reminded her of something, she felt in the pocket of her overalls and produced a small slab of chocolate. She broke it in half and gave one piece to Winston. Even before he had taken it, he knew by the smell that it was very unusual chocolate. It was dark and shiny, and it was wrapped in silver paper. Chocolate normally was dull brown and crumbly stuff that tasted as nearly as one could describe it, like the smoke of a rubbish fire. But at some time or another, he had tasted chocolate like the piece she had given him. The first whiff of the scent had stirred up the memory, which he could not pin down, but was powerful and troubling. Where'd you get this stuff? He said. Black market? She said indifferently. Actually, I am that sort of girl to look at. I'm good at games. I was a troop leader in the Spies. I do voluntary work 3 evenings a week for the Junior Anti-Sex League. Hours and hours I've spent pasting their bloody rot all over London. I always carry one end of a banner on the processions. I have no clue, mate. It's funny to me too. I've got to read it. I have to stone face this shit. This is difficult. I always look cheerful and I never shirk anything. Always yell with the crowd, and that's what I say. It's the only way to be safe. The first fragment of chocolate had melted on Winston's tongue. The taste was delightful. But there was still the memory moving around the edges of his consciousness, something strongly felt but not reducible to definite shape, like an object seen out of the corner of one's eye. He pushed it away from him, aware only that it was the memory of some action which he would have liked to undo but could not. You are very young, he said. You are 10 or 15 years younger than I am. What could you see to attract you in a man like me? Yeah. Something in your face. I thought I'd take a chance. I'm good at spotting people who don't belong. And as soon as I saw you, I knew you were against them. Them, it appeared, meant the party. And above all, the inner party, about whom she talked with an open, jeering hatred, which made Winston feel uneasy, although he knew that they were safe here if they could be safe anywhere. A thing that astonished him about her was the coarseness of her language. Party members were supposed to not swear, and Winston himself very seldom did swear, aloud, at any rate. Julia, however, seemed unable to mention the party, and especially the inner party, without using a kind of words that you saw chalked up in dripping alleyways. Yeah, I get that. And somehow it seemed natural and healthy, like the sneeze of a horse that smells bad hay. They had left the clearing and were wandering again through the checkered shade, with their arms round each other's waists whenever it was wide enough to walk two abreast. He noticed how much softer her waist seemed to feel now that the sash was gone. They did not speak above a whisper, outside the clearing. Julia said it. It was better to go quietly. Presently they had reached the edge of the little wood. She stopped him. Don't go out in the open. There might be someone watching. We're all right if we keep behind the burrows. The bush. I'm saying bush. Fuck it, I'm saying bush. They were standing in the shade of hazel bushes. The sunlight filtering through innumerable leaves was still hot on their faces. Winston looked out into the field beyond and underwent a curious, slow shock of recognition. He knew it by sight, an old, close-bitten pasture, with a footpath wandering across it, and a molehill here and there. In the ragged hedge on the opposite side of the bush of the elm trees swayed just perceptibly in the breeze, and their leaves stared faintly in the dense masses like women's hair. We get it, you're in love. Stop with the girl analogies now, man. Come on. Surely somewhere nearby, but out of sight, there must be a stream with green pools where dace were swimming. Isn't there a stream somewhere near here? He whispered. Sorry. Isn't there a stream somewhere near here? He whispered. That's right. There is a stream. It's at the end. It's at the edge of the next field, actually. There are fish in it. Great big ones. You can watch them laying in the pools under the willow trees, waving their tails. Oh. It's the golden country, almost, he murmured. The golden country? It's nothing, really. A landscape I've seen sometimes in a dream. Look, whispered Julia. A thrush had alighted on a bush not 5 meters away. Okay. So, that means jumped off the bush. Almost at the level of their faces. Perhaps it had not seen them. It was in the sun. They in the shade. It spread out its wings, fitted them carefully into place again. Ducked its head for a moment as though making a sort of obeisance to the sun. Okay. Is that another word for obedience? Interesting. And then began to pour forth a torrent of song. In the afternoon hush, the volume sound was startling. Winston and Julia clung together, fascinated. The music went on, minute after minute, with astonishing variations, never once repeating itself. Yeah, because it's not a fucking... Almost as though the bird were deliberately showing off its virtuosity. Sometimes it stopped for a few seconds, spread out and resettled its wings, and then swelled its speckled breast and again burst into song. Winston watched it with a sort of vague reverence. For whom? For what? What was that bird singing? No mate, no rival was watching it. What made it sit at the edge of that lonely wood and pour its music into nothingness? Practice? Maybe it didn't want to fuck up in front of a mate or a rival. Practice? Like anybody else doing stuff in private? Thought about that? Come on, man. Come on. I know they're animals, but they're not fucking daft. He wondered whether, after all, there was a microphone hidden somewhere near. He and Julia had spoken only in low whispers, and it would not pick up what they had said, but it would pick up the thrush. Perhaps, at the other end of the instrument, some small beetle-like man was listening, intently listening to that. But by degrees, the flood of music drove all speculations out of his mind. It was as though it were a kind of liquid stuff that poured all over him and got mixed up with the sunlight that filtered through the leaves. He stopped thinking and merely felt. The girl's waist in the bend of his arm was soft and warm. He pulled her round so that they were breast to breast. Her body seemed to melt into his. Wherever his hands moved, it was all as yielding as water. Their mouths clung together. It was all quite different from the hard kisses they had exchanged earlier. When they moved their faces apart again, both of them sighed deeply. The bird took fright and fled with a clatter of wings. Winston put his lips against her ear. Now, he whispered. Sorry. Now, he whispered. Not here, she whispered back. Oh, he's ready. Oh, he's ready. He's ready for the sex stuff. Oh, okay. Nah, not here, she whispered. Come back to the hideout. It's safer. Come on. Quickly, with an occasional crackle of twigs. They threaded their way back to the clearing. Yeah, they're going. They were there once inside the ring of saplings. She turned and faced him. They were both breathing fast. But the smile had reappeared round the corners of her mouth. She stood looking at him for an instant, then felt the zipper of her overalls. And yes! What the fuck? What's with the exclamation mark every time? And yes, it was almost as in his dream. What the almost as swiftly as he had imagined. He had torn her clothes off, and when she flung them aside, it was with that same magnificent gesture by which the whole civilization seemed to be annihilated. Her body gleamed with white in the sun, but for a moment he did not look at her body. His eyes were anchored by the freckled face with its faint, bold smile. He knelt down before her and took her hand in his. Have you done this before? Of course. Hundreds of times. Well, scores of times. Anyway. We're party members. Yeah, always with party members. Party members of the inner party. Oh, not with us, Swan. But there's plenty that would. Yeah, I bet. If they got half the chance. They're not so holy as they make out. And his heart leapt. Scores of times she'd done it. He wished it had been hundreds, thousands. Anything that hinted at corruption always filled him with a wild hope. Who knew? Perhaps the party was rotten under the surface, its cult of strenuousness and self-denial simply a sham concealing an inequity. I'm trying my best here, man. I have to keep reading. If he could have infected the whole lot of them with leprosy or syphilis, how gladly he would have done so. Anything to rot, to weaken, to undermine. He pulled her down so that they were kneeling face to face. Listen. The more men you have had, the more I love you. Do you understand that? Yep. You like sluts. I understand perfectly. I hate purity. I hate goodness. I don't want any virtue to exist anywhere. I want everyone to be corrupt to the fucking bone. Because I know that's what he wants to say, but he doesn't swear much, remember, from earlier. Well then, I ought to suit you. Look, it's all blown out and destroyed from all the cocks that have been inside of it. I'm corrupt to the bones. You like doing this? I mean, I don't mean simply me. I mean the thing in itself. Oh, I adore it. That was above all what he wanted to hear. Not merely the love of one person, but the animal instinct, the simple, indifferentiated desire that was the force that would tear the party to pieces. He pressed her down upon the grass among the fallen bluebells. This time there was no difficulty. Presently, the rising and falling of their breasts slowly to normal speed, in a sort of pleasant helplessness. They fell apart. The sun seemed to have grown hotter. They were both sleepy. He reached out for the discarded overalls and pulled them partly over her. Almost immediately they fell asleep and slept for about half an hour. That it. Winston woke first. He sat up and watched the freckled face still peacefully asleep, pillowed on the palm of her hand. Except for her mouth, you could not call her beautiful. There was a line or two around the eyes. Oh, come on, a line or two? Come on. Around the eyes. I mean, your neighbour's 30 years old with dust in the creases of her skin. Give me a break. If you looked closely, the short dark hair was extraordinarily thick and soft. It occurred to him that he still did not know her surname, or where she lived. The young, strong body, now helpless in sleep, awoke in him a pitying, protecting feeling, but the mindless tenderness that he had felt under the hazel tree, while the thrush was singing, had not quite come back. He pulled the overalls aside and studied her smooth white flank. In the old days, he thought, a man looked at a girl's body and saw that it was desirable, and that it was the end of the story. But you could not have pure love or pure lust nowadays. No emotion was pure, because everything was mixed up with fear and hatred. Their embrace had been a battle, the climax of victory. It was a blow struck against the party. It was a political act. Way to fucking sullen the moment, mate. Thanks. Well, this is 50 Shades of Grey. Let's keep reading. What the fuck? I'm... I'm a little bit upset by that. So now he's finished with her. He's like, yeah. I did it because the other party's in charge. I did it because it's political. Really? Okay. I mean, in fairness, I understand where he's coming from, but at the same time, really? Political? I mean, am I the only one who finds that a little bit odd? Well, maybe this is where thrush came from. Maybe you have sex because a bird sings to you, and then, you get thrush. Chapter 3. We can come here once again, said Julia. It's generally safe to use any hideout twice, but not for another month or two, of course. As soon as she woke up, her demeanour had changed. She became alert and businesslike, put her clothes on, knotted the scarlet sash about her waist, and began arranging the details of the journey home. It seemed natural to leave this to her. She obviously had a practical cunning which Winston lacked, and she seemed also to have an exhaustive knowledge of the countryside round London, stored away from innumerable community hikes. Now, I've written a story, a little horror story kind of thriller, and I've semi-done something like this, I guess, somehow. And it's a guy who's in a place where he doesn't fit in, and there's a girl that leads him through the whole thing, and she's the strong journeyful, the strong adventurous type. I'm wondering if I've somehow picked up on this. Although man's more magical and mystical and stuff. The route she gave him was quite different from the one which he had come, and brought him out a different way, at a different railway station. Never go home the same way as you went out, she said, as though enunciating an important general principle. She would leave first, and Winston was to wait half an hour before following her. She had named a place where they could meet after work, 4 evenings hence. So, in 4 days. It was a street in one of the poorer quarters where there was an open market which was generally crowded and noisy. She would be hanging about among the stalls, pretending to be in search for shoelaces or sewing thread. If she judged that the coast was clear, she would blow her nose when he approached. Otherwise, he was to walk past her without recognition. But with luck, in the middle of the crowd, it would be safe to talk for a quarter of an hour, and arrange another meeting. And now I must go, she said. As soon as he had mastered his instructions, I'm due back at 19:30. I've got to put in 2 hours for the Junior Anti-Sex League. Handing out leaflets or something. Isn't it bloody... Give me a brush down, would you? Have you got any twigs in my hair? Have I got any twigs in my hair? Are you sure? Then goodbye. My love, goodbye. Oh, goodbye, Martin. My love, goodbye. Brilliant timing. I've got something to take care of. Brilliant timing, mate. I'll see you in a bit, Martin. Could not have timed that better. Beautiful little pop-up there. Nice one. She flung herself into his arms, kissed him almost violently, and a moment later pushed her way through the saplings and disappeared into the wood with very little noise. I know, right? It's incredible timing. I might actually stop for a bit, because how long have I been here now? An hour again? 2 hours. What page are we on? 160. Oh, we're almost done. It's only a 400-page book. I reckon I could maybe finish this today or tomorrow. I could finish this. I'll tell you what, I'll leave it at the goodbye. That's where it'll end. Because it's been an hour and it's been a beautiful ending. Nice one. I couldn't ask for anything better. So... Goodbye, cruel world. I'm leaving you today. Goodbye. Goodbye. Goodbye.